Helena was talking about this. The question of the release of Marwan Barghouti and Ahmad Sadat. What do we know so far about the possibility of their release, and what would that mean for the Palestinian National Project?
It was vetoed.
Yeah,
Israel had a list of 25 names on it that were non-starters for negotiations, and Palestinians pushed on that for the entire time because the release of those figures would be very significant.
yeah,
Especially Marwan Barghouti, who has the capacity to unify the Palestinian political milieu, and Ahmed Sadat, who's in prison for an assassination operation that his fighters took, but he did not take himself. And he has been in prison since the beginning of the Second Intifada.
yeah,
It would have been significant to see those leaders released. And I think that, in the same way that Ahmed Yassin was released, it creates an image of victory. But more than that, it's the cadre that set up the next stage of the struggle for Palestinian liberation. The release in the Ahmed Jibril release in 1985 was a key stepping stone. Those fighters released became the main pillar, or one of the main pillars of the cadre that launched the first Intifada in Jabalia in 1987. And so those
yeah,
are very significant moments. The Shalit deal with Sinwar, you can see the history that was set in motion by that release. We can see it today. And so these are very important moments that Israel's very aware of. They try to make laws against negotiating for prisoners after each of these prisoner deals. They drag their feet on them like they did with Shalit for 5 years because they know the significance of them. And that is the reason, and it's in some ways the resistance not forgetting their fighters left behind is kind of the opposite of what Israel had shown us for the 741 days before this week, where they did leave their people behind and they went about prioritizing genocide and destruction and killing and making TikTok videos of it over bringing their soldiers home. So I think it shows the juxtaposition between the two movements for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, I have just a couple of comments on this. One is, and thank you, John, for that extraordinary history and presentation. I think it's so important to recall how central prisoners are in the Palestinian struggle. And it was the worsening treatment of the Palestinian prisoners before October 7th, the deliberate cruelty by Itamar Ben-Gvir, on top of the already very cruel and harsh torture-like Israeli prison conditions that have been documented by Palestinians and human rights organizations for decades. But Ben Gvir made it considerably worse, and deliberately so. He would gloat about, denying the prisoners bread, denying them showers, uh, really denying them basic health care, denying them dental care. Not that they were getting any of these things in anything like adequate quantities before, but that was one of the precipitating factors for October 7th, was Israel's campaign to make the prisoners suffer even more, plus the massive increase in so-called administrative detentions that was already escalating to record levels before October 7th. I think it's important to remember that because, you know, the West wants to write this narrative that history started on October 7th. It certainly didn't start for the prisoners. And even before October 7th, according to Ad-Damir, the Palestinian prisoners' rights group, more than 700,000 Palestinians have been through Israel's dungeons since 1967. 700,000 of a relatively small people. We're not talking about the United States population of 350 million. We're talking about today there are 10 million Palestinians, and that's, or 12 million, including the diaspora, in that range. The point is, a huge number have been incarcerated. I think I want to say something about Marwan Barghouti, who has this very symbolic importance. And I said this a little bit earlier this morning on speaking to our friend Jeremy Scahill on Dropsite News. There's really two Marwan Barghoutis, if you think about it. There's Marwan Barghouti, the human being, who is being subjected to harsh treatment, worsening treatment by Israel. There's been a campaign to make him suffer even more, as there has against other prisoners, and that absolutely has to end, and he should be freed. And I believe that the negotiators would have gone as far as they could to try to get those high-profile prisoners out, and I wouldn't second-guess them. They must have concluded that that was a bridge too far, and it wasn't going to happen, and they weren't going to prevent the rest of this agreement from going ahead, the release of the other prisoners, and first and foremost an end to the genocide. So they made that call, and I wouldn't second guess them at all. But there is Marwan Barghouti, the symbol, and people project all sorts of things onto him that I think are unfair to project. For some people who are not necessarily supporters of Palestinian liberation in, I'm trying to find a polite way to say this, but you have a lot of liberal Zionists who see Marwan Barghouti as their hope, not necessarily a hope for Palestinians, but their hope as someone with, this tough image and the credibility, having spent so many decades in Israeli prisons, that he would be the one who can come out and make concessions to Israel and force them onto the Palestinian people. And they're very explicit about that. That's why there has been sort of a liberal Zionist movement demanding the release of Marwan Barghouti. And on the other hand, you see people say, oh, Marwan Barghouti is the non-Hamas guy who can come out and crush Hamas in an election. So they see him as another tool for fighting the resistance, because again, he has this credibility. And now Marwan Barghouti hasn't come out and said he'll do any of this. This is what people are projecting onto him. And so I think we have to be very aware of these political narratives around Marwan Barghouti that are not necessarily fully in line with support for Palestinian resistance and liberation. And so, depending on the perspective you come from, and I just think we have to separate that from Marwan Barghouti, the man, who, like any other Palestinian political prisoner, should be freed now, and we would like to see him freed as soon as possible, aside from any political projects people are trying to dragoon him into with or without his consent.
Right, and his legitimacy comes from struggle. His legitimacy comes from the Second Intifada, from arming the Tanzim in the Second Intifada, from using the weapons of the PA to fight against the Israelis in the Second Intifada. And in terms of reconciliation, he's agreed by Hamas that he is the man for reconciliation. He agreed to it in prison with the prisoner's document, a necessary step that has to happen within Palestinian society to unify the political division that has been created.
But reconciliation isn't about this personality or that personality. It's not that Marwan Barghouti can produce a reconciliation that someone else can't. Reconciliation has to be based on principles. I know this is we're straying a bit from the topic, but reconciliation isn't just about goodwill. Let's all just get along. The reason there is a fundamental division between the Palestinian political factions, and this has lasted now for almost 2 decades, is very simple. It's because one side is committed to resisting Israeli military occupation, and the other side is deeply committed to collaborating with it against the Palestinian resistance and against the Palestinian struggle. And you cannot have reconciliation between collaboration and treason on the one hand and resistance and steadfastness on the other hand. It's impossible. That's why every effort at reconciliation, so-called reconciliation, has failed. You remember all the hullabaloo in Beijing a year or two ago, and all the Palestinian factions went and they signed on to the umpteenth reconciliation document. But as long as the PA and Fatah remain deeply committed to what Mahmoud Abbas calls sacred security coordination with Israel, not, neither Marwan Barghouti nor the Prophet Muhammad nor Jesus Christ can bring about reconciliation. Either one side has to give up its commitment to treachery and treason, or the other side has to give up resistance.
Yeah, the hope was that Marwan Barghouti could be the Fatah man who stopped that collaboration. I think that's the hope. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
there's no doubt about the PA. It can't exist in reconciliation the way it's structured right now.
Well, we're all going to keep a very close eye on these very delicate developments.